Hello, our guest is political scientist, academic Ghia Nodia. Welcome to our studio, Professor.
Thank you.
In your view, Armenia's recent political shift away from Russia and towards Europe, is it sustainable, and how it will affect on the whole region?
Generally, the situation is very uncertain. Lots of things will depend on the end of Ukraine war, outcome of Ukraine war, so how things will be regulated afterwards. There are too many factors, too many scenarios. But of course, the Armenia's shift, as well as to some extent Azerbaijan's shift away from Russia, that's very important fact. And okay, situation may change again everywhere, but at this point it reflects a very important trend, and this new trend is linked to the end of Karabakh conflict, and we all hope that it will be followed by a peace agreement.
Do you think the agreement will work?
I hope so. We don't know. We don't have agreement yet. But yes, I think that if there is agreement, and I hope agreement will be signed this year, my feeling is that it should work after it's signed.
Yes, and what about Georgian situation in this case? If Armenia and Azerbaijan going towards the west, how will Georgia?
Georgia is unfortunately isolated under this government. I think our government, for whatever reason, somehow put its cards on victory of Russia in the war with Ukraine. And somehow it based its policy on the assumption that the West was weakening and Russia was strengthening, but apparently it was a miscalculation. But this government somehow put itself into the impasse, and it cannot really change its position. So in Georgia we have in a very politically unstable situation. It's not just that there are protests are not as huge as they were in December, for instance, but we have this some kind of disarray within the ruling regime. We have very strong pressure from the West, prospect of sanctions, and we have this big gap between the government policies and preferences of the public.
If Georgia would become isolated, how Armenia and Azerbaijan can go towards the west? Don't you see conflict here, and how this conflict could be solved?
Yes, of course. This policy of the Georgian government, it somehow muddles, I would say, this situation in the region. And of course, Russia is very much committed to keeping this government, this pro-Russian government in Georgia, because it is the only kind of Russia's only foothold in the South Caucasus. And this, of course, will, hamper also Armenia's progress of integration with the West. Okay, Azerbaijan has different policies. It was never really interested in integration with the West, but it also is interested in having good relations with US and Europe. So yes, Georgia is an impediment, but okay, if also I guess normalization between Armenia and Azerbaijan will pave the way to normalization between Armenia and Turkey as well, and so there will be ways to circumvent Georgia. Georgia is an important country, we hope, but it's not indispensable. So if Armenia, Turkey also normalize their relations, then Georgia will be still bad that Georgia is somehow pro-Russian, but it does not mean that Armenia cannot develop its relations with Europe.
And Armenia's movement to West, how it will affect to fragile security situation in Armenia?
Okay, yes, I guess the problem for Armenia is kind of Russia can take revenge. I guess Russian main way for Russia to take revenge will be trying to destabilize Armenia internally, to create some kind of Armenian Ivanishvili in a way. I guess that's the Russian strategy, and nobody knows how it will develop. We did not expect from Russian government in Georgia, but we have it now. So I hope it will not work, but Russia will keep trying, so we can be sure about that.
Western countries are doing their politics in South Caucasus by the hand of Turkey. How do you see the influence of Turkish politics on Georgia and Armenia after Euro integration process?
Of course, Turkish position is very important, provided conflict with Russia and conflict with Iran. So Turkey is kind of the main partner of the West, obviously, but the West has its own kind of leverage, especially in case of Armenia. But I think, you know, it's very complex. Situation is very complex, as I said, but it is quite possible that the West, as represented by United States especially, but also Europe, will find a commonality of interest with Turkey as well.
Mm-hmm. And as someone who closely observed and experienced the 2008 Russian-Georgian war, how would you describe the key miscalculations on both the Georgian and Russian sides that led the outbreak of open conflict?
Okay, on the Georgian side, maybe we overestimated the importance of United States support for NATO membership. I think somehow Georgian government in a way delegated to the United States this task of convincing Europeans in the support of Georgian bid to join NATO. So in reality we had a split within NATO on the issue of Georgian membership, and Russia took advantage of that. That was the 2008 war. As to Russian side, okay, I guess they initially the war was not a big success for Russia because it hoped to change regime in Georgia. Its real aim was not to get hold of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. It controlled most of it anyway, but it wanted to change regime in Georgia, and it failed to change regime in Georgia, so it was not really Russian victory. I mean, it was formally, in military sense, it was Russian victory, but it was not Russian victory in a political sense. But effectively, Russia achieved what it wanted after the change of power in 2012. So,
isn't Armenia going by the steps of Georgia now?
I don't think there is any kind of predestination, or it does not mean that the same things should happen in Armenia. Future is unpredictable, so yes, you can imagine everything, of course, but also countries study from each other's mistakes. And when Ivanishvili was coming to power, he did not say that he would abandon Western ways. He wanted to kind of harmonize relations with both Russia and the West, and in 2012 it appeared possible, but it's no longer possible. Situation is changed. So therefore, that Armenians also know that, I mean Armenian people, so it does not mean that it should repeat what Georgians did.
what main mistake shouldn't do Armenia?
Okay, Armenia should base on its political decision on understanding the grand strategy, big strategy. I'm sure that many Armenians dislike Pashinyan's government or different aspects of how things are in Armenia, but decisions should not be made just on anger or dislike of certain things. I'm sure that everywhere things don't go the way people want, but should make more kind of cool-headed calculation of the alternatives. So what are real alternatives? And base their decision on this calculation.
Okay, during the days of the war, what moments or events left the deepest impression on you personally as a witness, citizen, and analyst?
Okay, I can say that the war led, at least in the short run, to consolidation of the nation and unity of the nation. And I think that was the main thing which I saw from the war, that unity was not maintained in the longer run, but in the short run, I think Georgian people showed lots of resilience.
Mm-hmm. And you have long warned about Russia's use of soft and hard power in the region. How has the Russian invasion of Georgia shaped the broader geopolitical reality in the Caucasus and Eastern Europe?
No, I think there are different ways in which it shaped. I think it showed that Russia can not only kind of use economic pressure or soft power. It was basically mainly relying on hard power, and it could openly flaunt international law. But I guess Western players sort of underestimated this episode. They thought it was some one-off strange thing, and so they didn't draw right conclusions from this episode. If we look at the region, then I guess part of the Georgian society saw this episode not only as a sign of Russian aggressiveness, but also weakness of the West. And I think this in part paved the way to Ivanishvili's advent to politics, that this created this fear of Russia. And Ivanishvili played this fear of Russia very well in 2012, but also continues to play on this fear now as well. And I also think that, for instance, Azerbaijan changed its policy to some extent and became more kind of moved to appeasement of Russia after 2008, because it also did not think that it could get away with kind of pro-Western policies. But now, of course, situation is changing again.
Mm-hmm. As a civic activist and academic, how has your role evolved in the past 4 years, especially in countering Russian narratives and supporting democratic resilience within Georgia?
Okay, I'm academic, so I returned to academia in February 2009 after my short stint in the government. So I work with new generation, and my task is, of course, to teach them, but teaching also implies a better understanding of liberal and democratic values, and better understanding of the role of Europe. So that's my task.
And what is your advice to new generation who is active fighting in the roads?
Okay, I think not to give up. I guess our new generation, young Georgians, showed a lot of resilience also in fighting for Georgia's European future. but so far there is no success, there is no kind of game-changing event, but I think consistency is very important, and I am sure that sooner or later Georgia will return to its natural pro-European path.
Your article, Nationalism and Democracy, is the most among of most cited articles in our region. How do you think does it work now in Georgia, in Armenia, in Azerbaijan?
You can be nationalist and be autocrat and not being democrat at all, but it does not work other way around. Democracy is a political system which requires patriotism, which requires unity of citizenship, citizenry, and it requires citizens that care for their countries, that look not only for their private business, but also think about broad national interests. So I think history of the last 2 centuries shows that you cannot have democracy without civic nationalism or patriotism.
But the situation in Azerbaijan is more different from Armenia's and Georgia's situation. Can you shortly describe in that lens the situation itself and how can be solved these problems?
Democracy is not universal in its reality. I mean, it may be a universal idea, but does not mean that democracy works everywhere. And it's very difficult political system to master. So we live, unfortunately, in the period when democracy is declining around the world, and it's also declining in our regions. There is some progress in Armenia, but there is backsliding in Georgia. Azerbaijan was never fully democratic, but it's also backsliding as compared to 1990. So that's unfortunate trend, but we know from past experience of the last 2 centuries that there are always ups and downs, that periods of decline are followed by periods of progress and vice versa. So we don't know what will work, including what will happen in Azerbaijan. But the fact that Azerbaijan is not democratic now does not mean that it will never become democratic.
Thank you, Professor. Our guest was a political scientist, academic, professor of Ilia University, Ghia Nodia.